Let's take a look at some business news now. And well, word from the US Federal Reserve that interest rates would stay low until there was substantial further progress. It allayed investor fears and reversed a morning sell-off on Wall Street. The Dow Jones and the S&P finally closing higher, as you can see there. The Nasdaq, however, which is full of growth stocks that are perhaps more sensitive to higher yields, didn't make it back into positive territory. In fact, closing down 0.5%. Meanwhile, trading underway on the main Asian indexes. Here's a look at the latest figures there. As you can see, those words from the US Federal Reserve having little, if any, impact there. That's read across the board, with the Shanghai Composite down over 1.5% and the Hang Seng in Hong Kong currently down almost 2%. Well, let's speak to market analyst at FXTM, Han Tan. Han, firstly, we saw that sign of a recovery on the US after that news from the Federal Reserve, but inflation fears, I imagine, still high in Asia, looking at those latest figures.
Yeah, indeed. So what we're seeing right now is that markets are still rather skeptical despite Fed Chair Jerome Powell's comments that we heard yesterday saying that the U.S. economy is still a long way from a full recovery and that inflation are not reaching troubling levels, right? But I think it remains to be seen how long markets can keep up this narrative. Sure, yields have been climbing higher, but what we certainly do have central bankers around the world. I'm talking about the Fed, the ECB, even the Bank of Korea, RBA, etc. They are all paying close attention to these rising yields because these yields, if it reaches a certain level, could really curtail their respective governments' ability to finance their respective recoveries. So again, it's a battle of push and pull between what the markets think and versus how well the Fed can dampen such talk before we see yields really reach a painful threshold for stocks beyond the declines we have already seen of late.
And tell us, Han, briefly about the tech sector. You know, looking at the Nasdaq there, it looks like it's definitely not in the mood for a recovery.
Yeah, and that's what I mentioned to my clients earlier this week as well. So the idea is that as the economy, the global economy recovers, some of the pandemic tailwinds that tech stocks enjoyed should ease. Also, of course, there are concerns over valuations. Tech stocks had been the darling during the pandemic, so perhaps they have run too hot for too long. So perhaps it's time for other sectors to really take the lead right now.
Finally, Han, how are the currency markets faring?
Yeah, still very much a dollar story, and that's an extension of where yields are and the extension of what the inflation outlook is. So if you look at dollar Asia, it's still very much range bound, given the tremendous gains that Asian currencies have seen of late. But with the G10 space, it's a bit more mixed. You have got the pound that has been a runaway leader, the Aussie dollar and New Zealand dollar also recovering given their ability to constrain the pandemic within their borders. But on the flip side, you've got the euro and some other safe haven currencies that are waning against the greenback as well. I think long story short, it still is dependent on what the US inflation outlook is, and then that feeds into the dollar and then into the rest of the FX universe.
Han Tan, market analyst at FXTM, thanks very much for your time. Well, meanwhile, among many areas, the French alpine resorts in the Haute-Savoie have been deprived of much business as downhill skiing this season has been banned due to the COVID pandemic. However, plenty of alternative activities are now on offer in a bid to keep some tourism going despite the virus.
In an attempt to recoup some of their losses, ski resorts in the southeastern French region of Haute-Savoie are going out of their way to offer different activities to visitors, with all downhill skiing still prevented by lift closures. Amongst a number of options on offer, there's cross-country skiing, sledging and even shooting.
On a une quarantaine d'années, donc le ski descendre, ravaler de la piste, ça on a fait depuis des années. Et du coup, je trouve ça vraiment sympa de pouvoir découvrir d'autres sports et d'autres façons de vivre la montagne.
For instructors, it's provided a welcome opportunity to keep doing what they do best, despite the significant loss of work they've experienced.
Forcément, c'est pas une saison qui est normale. Mais grâce à ce côté ski de fond biathlon, on arrive à faire bosser quand même les gens comme il faut.
It was here in Contamine-Montjoie that France's first COVID-19 cluster was detected back in February 2020. The reservation rate in the Haute-Savoie region has plummeted to 37% compared to the usual 80 to 90% in previous years.
Même si on a une fréquentation qui est correcte, qui est loin d'être catastrophique, On n'a pas la fréquentation telle qu'on l'avait il y a 2 ans, à hauteur d'un taux de réservation de 81% sur les stations de Savoie-Mont-Blanc. Donc les chiffres et les données sont loin d'être comparables.
Haute-Savoie is projected to suffer losses of €6 billion for the current ski season.